A pirate crew thought they'd hit the jackpot. A massive ship drifting silently through the Gulf of Aden, no lights, no flag, no escorts, just a tempting shadow in the dark. To the cartel-backed pirates, it looked like an easy target, and so they took off after it. What they didn't know was that this wasn't some helpless freighter. It was the last ship they ever wanted to mess with. Behind that massive silhouette was a fully loaded, nuclear-powered U.S. aircraft carrier. And by the time they realized it, they weren't making a getaway, and they were praying for one. What happened next in those dark waters? And how did a normal intercept turn into a nightmare on the high seas? Join us as we find out what happened to the cartel pirates who tried to hit the wrong U.S. Navy ship. They came armed, thinking a cargo ship had fallen into their hands, a big, slow ship ripe for the taking. Armed Somali pirates filled the two skiffs. They cut through the waves at full speed with their engines roaring across the dark waters of the Gulf of Aden. What was their target? A massive silhouette on the horizon. The said silhouette had no flag, no lights. It was just like a gigantic steel container floating quietly. In pirate logic, that usually means unescorted freight, but they couldn't have been more mistaken. It didn't take up to 90 seconds before the silhouette revealed itself before their eyes. They finally saw it for what it really was, and it was not a cargo ship at all. What was before them was a floating war fortress. Not just a U.S. Navy ship, but a full-blown nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. The kind that launches warplanes before breakfast and carries more firepower than some countries combined. The battle line was drawn. The pirates weren't ill-armed at all. They had AKs and RPGs, but the carrier was a different story altogether. There were about 5,000 sailors, sea-whiz cannons, radar-guided missile systems, and a zero-patience policy for threats. What happened next wasn't even a standoff. There was no fight. The Navy taught the pirates a hard lesson, one that started with a warning and ended with weapons drawn and the pirates face down on a rigid-hull inflatable boat, or RHIB. And this is what happens when pirates pick the wrong ship. And not just any ship, but trying to hit a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier was the mistake of the century. The radar picked them first. Two fast-moving blips with low signature and no AIS signal were approaching at top speed. In the Red Sea, that's never a good sign. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the system lit up in no time. Without hesitation, the operator called out the approaching threat as they were closing in. The officer on the deck didn't need to be told twice. He leaned into comms in the flight deck to launch a Seahawk immediately. Outside the information center, the carrier was already awake. This wasn't a sleepy convoy after all. It was a full strike group on patrol, and the carrier was its nerve center, not something to be messed with. In less than 2 minutes, an MH-60R Seahawk could be seen spinning its rotors as it roared off the deck. Loaded with a door gunner, radar systems, and eyes sharp enough to ID a tattoo at 5,000 feet, it moved with precision straight toward the incoming threat. Meanwhile, the sailors on the flight deck had paused for exactly 0 seconds. That means they've been up and about. The men in yellow shirts cleared space. Those in red shirts checked weapons load to avoid mistakes, and green shirts waved clearance for another bird on standby. In the CIC, it became clear that the skiffs were splitting. One was pulling apart while the other was still heading straight for the carrier. It was a typical pirate tactic: divide and confuse. But what did the Navy do? There was no panic at all. The captain gave a simple command. He ordered the crew to maintain course and let the pirates do what they wanted. The Seahawk, which was many feet up in the air at this point, had visual of the assault skiffs. The pilot wasted no time in calling in. He notified the crew of the hostile posture and the visible armament. And that was all the Navy needed. Because while most pirate encounters get the benefit of the doubt, this one has not only crossed the line, it has gone deep into the enemy's territory. To make matters worse for the pirates, a second Seahawk was launched. RHIB teams on the nearby destroyer USS Gravely geared up. On deck, Sea-Whiz spun quietly into standby. The whole ship was calm, focused, and fast. But if the pirates thought they were waiting to be attacked, then they were grossly mistaken, and they were not waiting to be attacked because on a U.S. aircraft carrier, hesitation is not protocol. Instead, it's a liability. As for the pirates, they had no idea that they were sailing into boiling water. From their own point of view, it was still just a big ship on the water. From the Navy's view, however, it was two threats closing in fast and everything was in motion. The pirates had no idea yet, but the warning shot was already locked and loaded, waiting to be fired. The skiff on the right didn't stop or change its course. It didn't even slow down. It just kept coming in with blind confidence, which was already bordering on stupidity. Having had enough, the Seahawk dropped altitude at 800 yards. Its side gunner swung the M240 into position, but there was no firing yet. The shooter simply took his posture. The posture itself was a not-so-subtle way of telling the pirates that they weren't welcome there. But did the pirates flinch? Number one of them even stood up, and with confidence, he held up something long and metallic over his shoulder. That's right, it was an RPG. And that was the trigger they needed. Hostility had been confirmed. Back on the Eisenhower, the captain didn't so little as to even blink. From the port side of the destroyer, two 11-meter RHIBs landed on the water. The vessels were packed full with Navy visit, armed to the teeth with whatever armor one can think of. These weren't diplomats, in fact, peace is not in their dictionary. These were literal floating SWAT teams with a license to not only act fast but to also hit very hard. Maybe the pirates didn't know this, but the carrier itself didn't need to fire a single round. That's what the task force was for. But if things escalated, Sea Whiz turrets were already humming quietly. The radar was tracking the skiff like a hawk staring at a mouse in an open field. If the carrier fires a shot, the battle may be over before it begins. While all this was going on, the pirates moved into flanking position. It was like a losing chess game. Losing indeed, because one skiff was trying to fake out two warships and a helicopter. That's not exactly a winning strategy, if it was a strategy at all. Overhead, the Seahawk's gunner gave a final visual warning. He fired a burst across the water, just in front of the skiff's bow. That was a crystal clear message. It was at this time that the pirates reacted, but it was a bit too late. The RHIB was already on them. They had their engines roaring, cutting across the surf like a scalpel blade. They showed what a real strategy looked like when the first VBSS team boxed in the skiff from starboard and the second team blocked retreat from the rear. They yelled over the loudspeaker, asking them to lay down their weapons and to hands up. Confusion arose. The panic was so great that one pirate tossed his AK into the water. Another froze, and that was a smart choice. But the others had their own plans. The Navy did not waste time, though. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Weapons were confiscated. The pirates were zip-tied and laid on the deck of the RHIB, with their skiff being towed behind. Security had returned to the sea. But what was Eisenhower doing this whole time? The large carrier never stopped moving. Not even for a second did it slow down a little bit. Because aircraft carriers don't need to handle every threat themselves. They bring an entourage that fights back harder. It was at this point the pirates realized they'd messed up. Not only did they pick the wrong ship, they had the misfortune of picking the wrong ocean as well. They were zip-tied, disarmed, and found themselves staring at deck boots. But the Navy was far from. The thing is, when a move is made on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, even a small one, they don't just neutralize the threat. They investigate, document, and send a message. Because it's their belief that tomorrow's threat might have night vision, not just AKs. So while the VBSS teams hauled the suspects aboard the carrier, the second Seahawk flew a perimeter loop. The first Seahawk had done its job, now it was its turn. It was scanning thermal signatures, hull markings, even checking if that skiff had any sort of tech inside. GPS, sat phones, encrypted radio, any hint that this was more than just a bunch of amateurs. And it turned out it wasn't just some slapdash pirate crew. Back on the Eisenhower, the mood was still business. The carrier hadn't even broken formation. It hadn't missed a single step. The catapults were still launching FA-18 Super Hornets into the sky. The deck crew hadn't even batted an eyelid. If anyone was there, aside those involved, they wouldn't even know an intercept had happened unless they looked at the radar logs. And that's the thing about carriers. They don't flinch. They have no reason to. Because while pirates are out here chasing money with leaky motors and RPGs, the U.S. Navy is running a staggering 100,000-ton nuclear-powered fortresses capable of launching jets every 30 seconds and directing regional security across half the globe. But there's a twist here. Remember the second skiff? The one that veered off early? It turns out that one didn't get away either. A drone quickly spotted about 6 nautical miles out, idling near a fishing vessel that looked a little too clean to be hauling tuna. It took only a few minutes for that vessel to be swarmed by a different RHIB team from the USS Mason, another destroyer in the strike group. The result was that 2 more pirates were detained, 1 laptop was seized, and a whole bunch of questions that'll be answered in a classified tent somewhere in Djibouti. What started as a simple intercept had just peeled back a much bigger layer. But the funny part is that the original pirate crew still thought they'd attacked a normal cargo ship. That was right up until a US Marine leaned over and brought them to reality. For anyone still wondering why a carrier is the worst target imaginable, here's what makes it untouchable. Here's how it is. Attacking a US aircraft carrier is like bringing a butter knife to a tank fight. Except in this case, it's not just a tank. It's a floating tank capable of launching fighter jets and has its own zip code. These pirates thought they were chasing an ordinary cargo ship. But when they came face to face with it, what they actually found was the most heavily protected vessel on any ocean. First off, it should be noted that an aircraft carrier is never alone. If a pirate is just pulling up on a flat deck, he's actually pulling up on a carrier strike group, a tight formation of destroyers, cruisers, submarines, supply ships, helicopters, drones, and a sky full of fighter jets. It's basically a floating war city with a zero patience policy. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, for instance, is nuclear-powered, over 1,000 feet long, houses nearly 5,000 personnel, capable of launching fully armed FA-18s every 25 seconds. But that's all there is to the Sea Beast. Below deck, there are multiple hangar bays, maintenance shops, weapon storage, radar control rooms, intelligence centers, and that's not forgetting that it has its own internal police force. Yes, a police force on the sea. There's no inch of the ship that's not being watched, logged, and defended. Then there are weapons. The carrier has close-in weapon systems, also known as the Sea Whiz, which fires 4,500 rounds per minute. It's like a laser-guided meat grinder that doesn't ask permission. Then there's the one known as ESSM, Evolved Sea Sparrow Missiles. Anti-air, anti-missile, anti-whatever. Fast, accurate, and brutal. And one cannot leave out the MH-60R Hawk helicopters, EA-18G Growlers for jamming, or E-2D Hawkeye radar birds that can see farther than most nations even can. With this arsenal, how can one even sneak up on a carrier? If a pirate crew threatens to surprise a carrier, they get flagged, tracked, locked, and lit up before they can even pick up speed. But here's the shocking part. In this encounter, the Navy didn't even use a tenth of what they had. They could have launched drones, fired warning flares, scrambled jets, deployed Marine detachments, or, if it got bad enough, authorized lethal force within seconds. But they didn't need to, because the threat was so far beneath their response capabilities, it was almost laughable. To put it into perspective, a single carrier strike group can control airspace the size of Texas. Yes, the massive city of Texas. That means from hundreds of miles out, they know so much about attackers. They know who they are, where they're going, and what is being carried. If they let anyone get close, it's because they want to see what such a person will do next. And if what is done next looks even slightly hostile, the game ends before it even begins. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower has been instrumental in fencing off attacks over the years. Recently, on 30th of December 2023, Danish container ship Maersk Hangzhou issued a distress call after coming under fire from 4 small ships commanded by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels from Yemen. Attempts were also made to board Maersk Hangzhou by force, while a contracted security team defended the ship. Dwight D. Eisenhower and guided missile destroyer gravely responded to a distress call from the container ship. Verbal commands were radioed to the Houthi ships, while helicopters from Dwight D. Eisenhower were dispatched. After taking small arms fire, U.S. Navy helicopters returned fire, sinking 3 of the 4 Houthi ships. There was no damage to U.S. equipment or personnel. In the process of responding to the distress call, gravely shot down 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles fired from Yemen. On 10 January 2024, the Houthis carried out more missile attacks against U.S. and U.K. ships. All projectiles were shot down by Dwight D. Eisenhower and other ships. On 12, aircraft from Carrier Air Wing 3 embarked on Dwight D. Eisenhower, participated in the 2024 missile strikes in Yemen against Houthi rebels. Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired by the cruiser Philippine Sea, as well as the destroyers Mason and Gravely, and the submarine Florida. So trying to pirate a U.S. carrier is not just reckless, it's literally asking to be tackled by an entire team when you're holding a water gun. And the Navy wasn't even done yet, because neutralizing the threat is only one step. The next step was exploiting every mistake the enemy made. So while the pirates remained in a steel room below deck, zip-tied and silently asking themselves why they did what they did, the Navy's intel teams were already dissecting the entire gear the pirates used. That RPG launcher was taken in and scanned for origin. The laptop. Everything was scanned, and the Navy was able to dig up quite a lot of information, because the Navy doesn't just deal with pirates, they study them. Hard. In the command spaces of the USS Eisenhower, the analysts were combing through everything they could comb through. Thermal footage, radio intercepts, power signatures, hull materials. Even the fuel cans got sampled for information. Of all these scratches and scabs, one strange frequency caught their attention. It somehow matched chatter previously intercepted near an illegal arms shipment from Eritrea. And just like that, a seemingly random pirate raid turned out to be part of a network, which meant the follow-up wouldn't be just an after-action report. It would be a real-time targeting package. 12 hours didn't pass before that data was already flying up the chain. CENTCOM, AFRICOM, coalition partners, intelligence fusion centers in Bahrain and Djibouti. The whole machine moved fast, because the next raid might not be with RPGs. Maybe they might come with drones next time, or smuggled man-pads. Or worse, the pirates may be unknowingly acting as bait for a deeper, hidden threat. And that's how the US Navy operates. Every small contact is treated like something to test, a potential distraction, or a prelude to something bigger. So instead of swatting flies, the Navy builds a map of the entire swarm. The pirates were just the beginning. After they were caught, the real work started. Navy teams began digging into the details. Drones flew new paths. Planners quietly said the 3 words that mean a big trouble. Target package confirmed. The sea looked calm again, but things had changed. The Navy was watching, and now so was everyone else. By morning, life on the USS Eisenhower was back to normal. Jets took off, people had coffee, and everything ran smoothly. But behind the scenes, a lot was going on. That messy pirate attack had set off a big reaction. Satellites moved. Strange messages were flagged. Even friendly ships nearby were warned. Because this wasn't just a warning to the pirates, it was a message to anyone else thinking about doing the same. A US carrier isn't easy to mess with. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.